Okay, this is the 7:30 regular business meeting. Please silence all electronic devices as a courtesy to those in attendance. And we're going to start with the call to order. Invocation. So we're going to go ahead and stand for invocation and stay standing afterwards for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us bow our heads and go to the Lord. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for an opportunity to meet. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to be an integral part of what the wonderful city of Lemoore does. Lord, I pray for the citizens of Lemoore that you would just restore them, as many are just going through some difficult times with everything that is going on in the world. Lord, pray this for the businesses, that you would have your hands on them and that they would come back to full working order, Lord. Pray for the law enforcement and the fire department, Lord, that they would continue to do your work, and for the health workers on the front lines, Lord, that they would continue to be used by you to guide people, Lord. And we pray right now for each of the members of the city council, Lord, that you would grant them wisdom. We know your word says that when you pray for wisdom, you grant it abundantly, Lord. So I pray right now for wisdom as they help to just discern and understand what the best way to lead this city is, Lord, and to do the right thing by the citizens of the city, Lord. And we pray for just protection for the entire city. Pray for health, Lord, and pray for your guidance throughout the weeks and the days to come. And thank you for being a God who hears and answers our prayer, Lord. So we come before you now, humbly seeking you, asking your presence here. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, ready? Salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Ecker. Okay, roll call.
Councilmember Orth. Here. Councilmember Gornick.
Here.
Councilmember Cheney. Mayor Pro Tem Matthews. Here. Mayor Lyons. Again, jeez.
Yeah, but Mayor Neal, he's gone, but I'm here instead.
First time jitters.
Yeah. Oh, you're great. Okay. So ceremonial presentations, none, and department and city manager reports. Oh, wait, no, I missed one. The agenda, the closed session report.
Nothing to report, Mayor and Council.
And agenda approval, additions and or deletions.
Yes, Mayor, we've had a request from resident Connie Willis to pull consent calendar items 3-2 and 3-4.
3-2 and 3-4. Okay. Okay, so public comment. Public comment will be in accordance with the attached policy. This item is reserved for members of the audience to address the city council on items of interest that are not on the agenda and within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. It is recommended that the speakers limit their comments to 3 minutes each, and it's request that no comments be made during this period on items on the agenda. The council is prohibited by law from taking any action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda. Prior to addressing the council, any handouts for council will be provided to the city clerk for distribution to the council and appropriate staff. So now we'll go to ceremonial presentations, which there are none, and we'll go to department and city manager reports.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. One of the big things going on right now is, I'm sure many of you know because you have boxes downtown, but the downtown's really starting to shape up a little bit. We've got a lot of the planters being worked on, cleaned out, some new plantings. It's nice to see. I talked to Sheila today, and she's as excited today as she was when we started this. And she said, give me another month and it's going to be even better. So I have no doubt that we will do that. But I wanted to thank everybody that's taken that up and gone down. I actually took my daughters through there and my wife, and can be proud of it. It looks good. So I want to thank everybody for their participation. That's it.
Okay. So now we're going to do the consent calendar. Items considered routine in nature are placed on the consent calendar. They will be considered and voted upon in one vote as one item unless a council member or a member of the public requests individual consideration. And Ms. Connie Willis has already pulled 3-2 and 3-4. So the other ones are approval of minutes, 3-1, regular meeting, February 2nd, 2021, and 3-3, approval for a bid award for the Lamore Youth Sports Complex shade structures. So would anybody like to pull either 3-1 or 3-3? How about anyone from the public? Would anyone from the public like to pull 3-1 or 3-3? Okay, seeing none, I guess.
You can do a motion for approval.
Yeah, so we'll do a motion for approval for 3-1 and 3-3.
I'll make a motion to approve
Second.
3-1.
Okay, so Mrs. Matthews motioned and Mr. Gornick second. Mrs. Matthews,
Aye.
Mr. Gornick,
Aye.
Mr. Orth,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. So 3-1 and 3-3 are approved. So we're going to 3-2. Nathan, you want to take 3-2 or?
Yeah, so what we have here is an agreement between the city of Lemoore and Tim Welsh. There is a small concession area that has been used for storage over the past decade or so. He came to the city well over a year ago and expressed interest in that, and it kind of died down throughout the COVID and stuff, so we brought it back up. Basically, Tim's gonna make the required upgrades to that through the county and to be able to use it as like a concession for snacks for kids and people using the water feature, and maybe do some rentals of skateboards and things out of there. And then he'll pay a fee to the city. I believe we're started out at $100 a month because there's a lot of things he has to do as far as water heaters, electrical service that we were going to credit back that $100 a month until we kind of reimbursed for those costs. So there's no cost to the city up front, but it's really just an added benefit to the area. So that's what it is. So I don't know what Ms. Willis
So
has.
does anybody from council have a comment on it?
Yeah, the only question I have was, we're doing these renovations first?
So Mr. Welsh will be responsible to do the renovations to get it up to code and get it current. And once those are done, then it'll open for him to use for the public. So the city does not have to come out with any money out of pocket.
Is there anything preventing us? I mean, is this something we should open up for bid if this is a concession we want at those areas where we just let it open to anybody who wants to? I mean, my point is, does everybody know that this is an opportunity for them to?
So this is one of those where a local business owner came to the city and said, hey, that little building there, if I can, I'd like to work a deal with the city to lease that area. So we have not taken it out to an RFP or an official bid packet to anybody. Typically when things come like this, they come all the time. People want to rent or lease land. Those property, they usually go to a closed session. This was one that was pretty straightforward. So it's up to the council if they want to approve it or deny it.
Well,
I'm just curious in terms of how we operate it. Well, let's say if Mr. Walsh, and I don't know him.
Well, actually, it's Miss Willis was the one who
Yeah,
pulled it.
Mrs. Willis is the one that pulled it, so.
He's talking about Tim.
But no, I'm talking about the gentleman who wants to do this.
Yeah.
Well, let's say he decides after a year or two, he doesn't want to do it anymore. What would we do then? Just to see if somebody comes up, or would we open it up to see if somebody wants?
Yeah, if he walked away from it, the renovations would be done. The city's in no way obligated to reimburse him for his costs. So we would just take it back, and there is indemnifications on the city. So we're held harmless for the issues that are having there. So we would be able to go out and find a new vendor for it, or maybe have city take it over, but it would be available to use down the road.
Good. I plan to vote yes.
So is there any other, okay, so let's open this up to public, and maybe we can hear from Connie Willis.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
The reason I asked is because I wanted to make sure of what I thought it said, concessions and the possibility of renting and those things. Absolutely, 100%. We need that. And that's why I just wanted to hear what you guys had to say, because I know the consent calendar, we can just say aye, and we don't know what the actual item was. So thank you very much for allowing me to pull it and hear your answers.
Okay, so are you satisfied? It sounds like it.
I am.
Okay.
Yes.
So, okay, I'll bring it back to council and we'll, what's
Any other
that?
public
Were there
comments?
any other public comments?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was there any other public comments? Seeing none?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Okay, so that one's going to
I'll
be
second that.
Mr. Gornick and Mrs. Matthews. Okay, Mr. Gornick,
Aye.
Mrs. Matthews,
Aye.
Mr. Ord.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. So 3-2 passes. On to 3-4.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'd like to hear from Ms. Willis if she has specific comment or questions that she'd like me to address first before I give my presentation.
Ms. Willis, are you there?
Okay, I'm back.
Okay,
Actually, I read a lot of information. I understand that it sounds like somebody got, department kind of got, what do you want to say? Put together. And so the discussion or the information she's going to have is going to talk about how the monies go to the salaried people or however many people might have lost their job. I don't really know, but I was just curious about that. So I'm sure her report will be clear on that, right?
Okay, so just to add some context, no one is losing their job.
sorry.
So I even think that was mentioned in the staff report.
I'm sorry, Ms. Beer, for those that are listening online, could you go ahead and remove your mask so you're a little more,
I'm pleased to remove it.
thank you.
Okay, so much better. So as many of you know in the community, we have started, or actually we begun a TTHM project years ago. That is the state mandated water quality project that the city has created. And we have 2 new plants that are in construction. And we've actually been informed very recently that they're ready to start commissioning. So the construction is nearly complete. We received some information from the state that said that our plants are going to be graded at a higher grade than our current water facility. So we are going to go from a T3 plant, which to those of us that aren't in water, that really doesn't mean anything, right? But we're going to be going to a T4 plant. The reason why this is important is because the state is very clear about what the mandates are for the certification requirements for the people that operate those plants on a daily basis. And when we started doing an analysis of our current staffing, we determined that we had some pretty significant holes. And what I mean by that is we had individuals that weren't certified to the level required to complete commissioning on our plants. So we can start the commissioning process, but we won't be able to complete the commissioning process until we have certain people in certain roles. I'm sorry if I'm speaking vague, but I have to be very careful not to disclose any personnel information in a public forum. So one of the things that we did was we had to do an analysis of our staffing. And it was clear that there were some remedies that needed to be made. And one of those remedies is the fact that we had some individuals, or I shouldn't say individuals, they were positions that were underpaid in the market. And so what we ended up having to do was an analysis of some of our neighboring agencies. And you have to be careful because not all plants are created equal. So you have very different complexities. The systems that we're going to have in the city of Lamore are the first of its kind, correct, Nathan?
Yes.
So we have to make sure that we're paying people well enough that once they're certified at those levels that they want to stay here, because it's not like you can just go and pick someone up off the street to fill these positions. So Nathan, as the city manager, has the authority to draft job descriptions. He has the authority to run the day-to-day operations of the city, including implementing reorganizations that are required. However, we need council approval when it comes to anything that's budgetary. And because giving raises to these positions is going to result in a budgetary impact, we're here to see if council will approve the salary schedule. So years ago, the city adopted a salary matrix. And all it is a simple document that assigns a range and the salary steps 1 through 6 that go with that range. The salary schedule establishes a range per position. So the schedule that was attached to the agenda packet, all the red data was the revised data. So you had 2 positions that were crossed off. So they were utility operators 3 in both water and wastewater. Nobody is in those roles. They're not positions that are currently filled, and we don't need them in the new reorganization. So rather than assigning them a range and leaving them there, we're choosing to eliminate them. The others are getting range increases or are newly classified positions that didn't previously exist and didn't previously have ranges. So we're asking council to approve the salary matrix and also allow us to adopt a new position allocation, because each budget has a position allocation in the budget book that says how many people in each title are employed. We need to be able to change the titles to match the new job descriptions. The number of personnel in water is going to stay the same as is currently allocated. Same thing is happening in wastewater. So no one's losing their job, but we're changing the titles of certain positions and ensuring that the appropriate certificates are obtained by the people that are in those roles.
Okay. That's it? Okay, so we're going to do this a little backwards. Connie Willis, did that answer your question?
100%.
Okay.
Good job.
So, council, do you guys have any further questions or comments? No? So I will open it up to public right now for any other additional comments. None? Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just, it's kind of timely after looking at the budget or the audit reports today and looking at the funds of each of these accounts. I guess I'm fine with the reorganization, but there's also some real structural things we have to look at in terms of those operational funds to square everything up. And there's a lot of training that needs to go with these individuals as well, right?
Yes, so we do have individuals that, let me be clear, there are individuals in the water department that are certified, but there's definitely additional certification that needs to occur. That's actually already exists in the current budget, but one of the challenges that we faced is the fact that with COVID, the state Department of Water Resources has not been providing any of the state testing. And that's one of the challenges, is that even though the funds are there to train the individuals, the tests are not available. And so we're going to have to do our best to kind of make our way through that process.
There's no other place we can go to get the test.
There isn't. So the only thing we're going to be able to do, regardless of whether or not you guys adopt the salary schedule, is there are certain positions we have to fill. But I have to know how I'm recruiting for those as far as what salary goes with that particular position. And so if once I fly it, we're going to hope that we get people with the level of certification that we need that will apply to come and fill those positions for us.
But you just said that there's no way they can go get this training because you don't know where it's at. So if we're gonna,
Not currently. When COVID's over, yes, they can.
where would they go?
They're going to go to the state.
Yeah, the state provides the testing, Councilmember Gornick, and kind of how it works. First, you have to study up and take the test. So if you take the test, for instance, to become a treatment 3-level operator with the state, you go in, you take the test, and then they grade and you pass the test. Okay,
No
once
problem with that.
you pass that test, now you have to complete 1 year of operator in training before you technically receive your T3. So with COVID, it's put us behind the curve here, probably by at least 18 months to 2 years on some of our guys. Now, the big difference is before we were a T3 plant. So our utilities manager, Mr. Souza, is a T4 D3 certified through the state. So he can be the chief plant operator. But in order for him to have days off, we're still required to have at least a T3 shift operator to cover the weekends. And when Mr. Souza, because as much as he loves to work, he does take vacation every now and again. So that's kind of where the difference is now with this new plant coming out. We don't have the T3s we need to run the off shifts.
Right.
So working towards it.
You're saying that the state has not provided the opportunities for training advancement.
So we can there's different ways of doing trainings. The state has some conditional, like educational trainings that go on. We have done some trainings in-house and there's stuff you can study offline, but the test sites have been shut down. I have heard that there is exemptions that can be made in emergency situations to try to get somebody through. But we haven't gone there yet. When we did this back in 2016 and went out for the bond for water and stuff, we did know we would have to probably have a higher certification. In the original matrix to bond, we did have an increase for the positions and people we'd need to run this plant. Unfortunately, we've talked about it before, the guaranteed maximum price on this plant went from an engineer's estimate of 18 million to 30 plus million. So any money, we set aside. So we knew this was coming. We knew we had to work on it. We've got several people that have tested for T3s that have to wait that year to get it. So I think there's a short gap right now of 1 T3, right, to get us 2.
Correct.
So
So
within
both,
a year, we should have everybody up to speed. Huh?
Yeah, so the state will let us commission, but they're going to be hard pressed to say, go execute and give us full range unless we make sure we have the minimum,
Right.
the right people.
Right.
And we wouldn't want to start it up without the right people anyway.
Right.
So this structure gets us compliant with everything we need to be to get this plant online, and it gives us the tools to go out and recruit and get the right people in. We need it at a pay scale that's comparable to Hanford. It's a little bit more than like Corcoran, but I was talking to my partner over in Corcoran today, and his comment was, we get everybody to T3s and their D3s, and then they leave to go to CalWorks or somewhere else because the pay discrepancy is so much higher. So we're doing okay. I think the pay scale that the team put together and the comps in the area, we're right where we need to be. I think it'll do us well for at least the next several years.
Thank you.
Now, is there a possibility we can go out and hire somebody instead of having to worry about the training aspect of it?
so the city has been in that position before and we have done that, but I can tell you from a cost analysis perspective, it's not real effective. So in the past, the city was paying about $11,000 a month for a single person, and they weren't even full-time, to come and help operate our department. It was before we hired our current utilities manager. So it's pretty expensive to do it that way. And in this particular model, you would need 2 bodies full-time. So at a minimum, and I'm just guessing, you're looking at $22,000 a month just to try to accomplish that. The reality is most of the employees in water department are doing their best to get their training and work their way up through the system. But we are in a position now where with the current staff you have in place, there isn't enough time to, even if the state was offering testing, to afford for them to take the test, wait for their time, their experience of time in grade in order to obtain their cert without it significantly impacting, the implementation of the project, unfortunately. So people are provided the opportunity, to Mr. Gornick's point, they are provided the opportunity for training. It's just we're kind of stifled right now, like every other agency, on state testing.
At the end of the day, they're going to let us turn our machine on,
Yes,
pending we're going to do what we say we're going to do.
correct.
To get a
At least
cert.
that's my understanding. Every indication from the state at this point is that, yes, that is exactly what's going to happen.
Cool. Okay.
So what you're saying is instead of doing city council, I should have got my T3.
Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Yes. All right. So is everybody satisfied, or is there any more questions? So we're looking for a motion to approve resolution 2021-03.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, so we'll have a motion by Mr. Orr
I'll second.
and Mrs. Matthews, second. Mr. Orr,
Aye.
Mrs. Matthews,
Aye.
Mr. Gornick.
Hi.
I vote aye as well. 3-4 passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay. Moving on, public hearings. Seeing that there is none, we'll go on to new business. 5-1, report and recommendations. City of Lamore audit report for the year end June 30th, 2020. Mr. Spear, you're up again.
Sorry, because it's not really me.
Oh.
So this evening, I know my name's on the staff report, I apologize. So this evening, we have Brian Henderson from Hudson Henderson and Company. He is here this evening to present our audit findings and our audit report to council. They are the independent auditor that we hired. This was their second year auditing us. 2019 fiscal year was the first. I believe Mr. Henderson has a PowerPoint presentation, and you all will see it on Zoom. Is that
It's on
correct?
right now. It's coming up.
Okay, perfect. So Brian, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good evening.
Perfect. So yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. So my name is Brian Henderson, and I'm the partner at Hudson Anderson and Company that has overseen the audit, the financial statement audit for the city of Lemoore. So I'm going to do a quick brief presentation here to kind of go over the audit, the results of the audit, and kind of some high level review of our findings as well, and also follow up on prior year findings and items looking forward.
Oh, if it won't work, that's fine. Sorry, Brian, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty.
No problem.
Sorry, we're just trying to get a mic closer to the. Go ahead, Brian. Continue.
Okay. So we perform our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. Being that you're a government, we also have to perform them under governmental auditing standards, also commonly referred to as the Yellow Book standards. In certain years in which you expend federal awards in excess of $750,000, perform what we call the single auditor audits, in accordance with uniform guidance. That was not applicable in 2020. But just sometimes that can be applicable, so we touch base. So the main things are general accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. Our overall responsibility as the auditor is to issue an opinion, and that opinion being to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are presented in all material respects. So essentially, we end up issuing an opinion that's either unmodified or clean or modified as to whether or not they're free of material misstatement. Our audit does not necessarily address the financial condition of the city. So sometimes that can be misconstrued with what the auditor is ultimately responsible for. And so part of the reason why I'm going over this too is I'm aware of some of the changes up on council this year. And so and we've seen this with a couple other cities that we've audited this year as well. So we're kind of taking it back to give a little more background on the financial statement audit. Our purpose of the audit is not to necessarily detect fraud. So we don't take responsibility for finding fraud, even if they existed. We do incorporate what we would assess as a risk of material misstatement due to fraud or error. And so we consider that in our analysis of the city and our overall risk assessment and performing the audit. We consider internal control or financial reporting for the expression of our opinion on the financial statements. But we don't issue an actual opinion on the effectiveness of internal controls. That is also known as a SOX report, or something that public companies that are audited in accordance with the SEC guidelines have to have, but governments do not. We do perform tests of the city's compliance with certain provisions of laws, regulations, and contracts, as well as grant agreements. Specifically, even in a non-single audit year, we do look at certain items. In a single audit year, that gets much more expanded. But again, the purpose of that is to establish whether or not there'd be a material effect on the financials, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the overall compliance of the city in accordance with laws, regulations. Now, obviously, if something came to our attention, then that we would be required to communicate, follow up, and determine whether or not that led to a material error in the financials. The city ultimately is responsible for the financial statements. That includes the preparation and fair presentation of these financials. That means that they must be accurate and complete in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles in the United States. They must also maintain effective internal controls. So that starts with the design, implementation, and maintenance relevant to the fair presentation of the financials to ultimately say that they're free of material misstatement, whether due to error or fraud. So ultimately, it's the city's financials, and we issue an opinion at the end of the day as to whether or not they're fairly presented. So we did issue our opinion on February 10th, 2021, in accordance with both general auditing standards as well as the Yellow Book standards. And we issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, stating that for the year ended 6/30/2020, they were presented fairly and free of material misstatement. We also perform an additional engagement, and it's an agreed upon procedures engagement over the annual appropriations limit for the city. And so we had no findings per the procedures performed on that. So that one, we don't necessarily issue an opinion. It's just, these are the procedures we're required to perform, which include recalculation, establishment of the proper board approval, establishment of the annual appropriations limit, and then ensuring that it's done correctly. So there was no findings with that audit, or I shouldn't say audit, that agreed upon procedures. Some required communications I have with you, City Council, has deemed those charged with governance of the city. So the only real sensitive estimate that affects the financial statements include the pension liability. And the reason why that's a significant estimate is it's heavily reliant on CalPERS actuary data. So that includes a future outlook on the possibility of the overall actuarial accrued liability, also known as the pension liability, offset by any fiduciary assets to ultimately end up presenting the net pension liability as reported on the citywide financials. All financial statement disclosures are neutral, consistent with prior year, and clear. We had no significant difficulties encountered in performing the audit. So with that, big time kudos to the finance team, Michelle, Linda, and everyone involved. Not only was it much smoother audit than 2019, this being our second year, but also in dealing with COVID. We issued the audit earlier this year. The finance team ended up having to send most of the documents electronically to us. And I know that's time consuming, but then it didn't delay the audit. We were able to get it done in a timely manner and issue our opinion. So definitely a much smoother audit in that regard. So I want to make sure I mention that and emphasize it. All misstatements were noted during the audit were corrected by management. There was no major disagreements with management. And when we say that, we mean in regards to accounting policies, transactions being recorded, things of that nature. We do request representations from management, and that mostly has to do with ultimately management taking responsibility for the financials. And we're unaware of any other consultations with other independent accountants. So the keyword there is independent. So overview of findings, we had one kind of minor finding this year. So it is called a material weakness, but that's mostly because it led to a cumulative material adjustment that was noted during the audit. Management does provide their feedback on that. And so in our report to management, they provide a response and corrective action plan. Ultimately, it was just prepaid assets and the inventory for the golf course. The golf course inventory was performed. At the end of the year, we must adjust the inventory count to what's actually held at year end. The account was being performed. Unfortunately, during the financial closing process, that adjustment just didn't get recorded. Then also with the prepaid assets, that just had been rolled for a few years. And so that was a minor adjustment, but between the two, it ended up being a material adjustment, hence the material weakness based on the quantitative factor in that regard. But as I'll touch base here on the next screen, you'll see this is a huge improvement as compared to last year. We had no other matters that require communication, no other findings or issues or anything of that nature. As you can see, last year we had 4 findings, being over financial reporting. Well, it's fun when I got a typo on my own slide there. Financial reconciliation and reporting. Bank reconciliations, capital assets, and payroll reporting. All those were deemed material weaknesses last year. Those were all properly implemented in the current year, meaning management provided a corrective action plan, followed through with that plan, and then implemented proper procedures to remediate those. So that is a huge improvement as compared to the prior year. Also last year on the GAN report, or the annual appropriations report, we did have an issue, and won't call it a finding because it's agreed upon procedures, but an item of note that the per capita change rate was being used wasn't correct. That was implemented and also retroactively implemented to correct prior years. So that was done without exception this year. So as you can see, a very large improvement on the financial reporting, internal controls, and the preparation of the financials as compared to the prior year. Our audit procedures primarily started, well, they're normally on site, but this year they weren't. Little COVID situation happening in the world. But we started with what we call interim field work in November. So that takes place, it was generally a week. It's spread over a couple of weeks on our end. That's where we focus pretty heavy on test controls, detailed testing. We're looking at specific items such as cash disbursements, receipts, payroll, things like the consent item that you just approved where you're going to change some pay rates. We'll be looking at that in the next audit. Then we end up doing final field work. Final field work is where we heavily focus on substantiation of balances, reconciliation, year-end reporting, and then ultimately the building of the financial statements and then issuing our opinion on them. Our audit is performed using a risk-based audit approach. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we audit every item. That would be a forensic audit. A risk-based audit approach is very much where we follow procedures and recommendations by AICPA and other authorities that govern what we do, and we establish a risk assessment. And we take a look at what we deem are the most risky areas. We still perform analytics and other types of items on what we would deem low risk items. We establish an audit risk assessment on different sections of the city and then perform the audit in that regard. We do look for areas of possible fraud and abuse. That includes performing inquiries with all levels of management all the way up through city council. And then we complete our reports, and they were basically done in January. And then there's always a little tidy up and clerical cleanup and things like that by the time it got issued there in early February. There was no real big changes this year. So with COVID, the GASB, or the Government Accounting Standards Board, actually delayed some of the pronouncements that were supposed to be implemented this year. Some of them they delayed for 1.5 years. So for example, the leases, we'll be changing how we account for leases in government reports. That's going to be delayed 1.5 years, so ultimately 2 years now. But some of the other ones did get delayed 1 year. We did implement one new one this year, and it mostly had to do with fiduciary activities. Not really a major change, something probably only auditors notice, and it's a slight change in what we used to call your agency funds, we now call custodial funds. And there was a new kind of an income statement for that used to be presented as optional, is now required. But other than that, that's not a major accounting change. We did make an adjustment to bring in some funds into what we call custodial as opposed to private purpose trusts or other types of funds like that, but that was not a major change. We did have a footnote in that regard just to show that. Otherwise, that kind of concludes the overall. I purposely don't go into the details of the financials. It's a rather large document, and I'd imagine you want to go home at some point tonight, so that would take a long time. But I'm open to any questions you might have on the audit or anything in that regard.
Does anybody have any questions?
I do. Hi, Brian. Are
Hello.
you home?
I am.
Oh, good, good. Well, then you don't mind a few more questions then.
No, I do not.
When I was looking at the audit, you mentioned earlier our annual, our ARC for CalPERS. What is it and where could I find it in the audit?
So you're going to find that it's going to be called the net pension liability. And then there's a footnote. It's a rather large footnote that discusses that in the financials. I guess I could stop screen sharing so you don't necessarily have to see that, but I'll pull it up exactly for you. One beauty of being at home and having access to my computer, I guess. If you look at the financials on page 4, that's the statement of net position. So that is what we call the government-wide report. And so that's the overall full accrual basis of the city itself. And in there's kind of bottom half of the page there under liabilities, there's a net pension liability. So for the city, the total of that is 13.4 million. Now take into consideration too, that's an actuarial determined number. So there's a large amount of actuarial data, including death rate, average age of retirement, spousal benefits, other types of things that go into that. And that is projecting how much liability that's going to incur with all the employees, taking the net present value of that figure. Now, the footnotes themselves give a lot more detail as to how that number is built, specifically in note 12, which starts on page 43 of the financial statements. That gives a pretty good information on the type of plans that are provided, miscellaneous as well. And then It gives an idea. There's some other numbers that go in there with deferred inflows and outflows and other items, but it kind of gives some actuarial assumptions, actual cost method, different things of that discount rate. Something to note that sometimes is quite interesting is that discount rate can have a huge impact on the number that's actually in the financials. So right now the discount rate is 7.15%. That's what leads to the estimated $13 million liability. If the discount rate was 1% lower, meaning your rate of return on the investments that you have, so if it was 6.15, your liability would be 20 million, almost 21. If it was 1% higher, meaning you were earning 8.15% on those investments, that liability would only be 7 million. So you can see just the change in 1% can have a swing of 6 to 7 million either way. Now, CalPERS has kept that rate at 7.15 for the last few years, just based on their average and projected and historical rates and trends that they believe that this will be. It seems to be fairly reasonable based on what we've seen. Obviously, they have the same discount rate for everyone that's inside CalPERS, including everyone that's in this plan in which you're in, and even the larger entities that have their own separate plan as well.
What is our ARC, annual ARC that we have with CalPERS? I think that's all we have is CalPERS, right? As a city.
Right. So the city's contributions for June 30, 2020 was 1.6 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, do I open this to public for a question too? So is there anyone from the public have any questions for Mr. Brian Henderson? Okay, Brian, well, thank you. Thank you for that.
Someone can make a motion to receive and file.
Oh, okay. So we need a motion to receive and file the report.
I'll make a motion. Receive and file.
Okay. Mr. Ward. Second?
I'd like to second with a note that congratulations on making the progress from last year to this year. It's good. Let's keep it up.
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Gornick. So, Mr. Orth,
Aye.
Mr. Gornick,
All right.
Mrs. Matthews,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. So, thank you, Mr. Henderson. Your report's been received and will be filed.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to the next section, brief city council reports and requests. Mr. Orth.